So instead we decide that, but if we go up, say, 20 vertical meters, we can get 5 good turns. So we do that, and the whole mountainside collapses, and the crack propagates uphill. And this avalanche that we remotely triggered, it was, I've heard 300 meters, I heard 500 meters wide, and it went 300 to 500 meters long. It took huge trees. We were hit. This was a 2-meter wave that just came down the mountain, hit us over our head, threw us into the trees, and by a miracle, we all survived.
So the first question that comes to mind when you hear someone say that they were in an avalanche may be, what is it like to be in an avalanche and survive?
Right. But the second question, and the more important question, is this. What decisions led you to be in a place where the avalanche occurred? Behavioral economics started out trying to figure why people made predictable errors in decision making, especially when there was math to make it clear that one decision was superior to another decision. And as the field of behavioral science has expanded, researchers have continued that exploration. This podcast, Behavioral Grooves, explores why we do what we do, and we rely on our guests to provide interesting insights into the answers for that question. But back to our story. Our guest went on to comment about her decision.
But I mean, for me, that was just like, if you would ask me on the road or back in Umeå, would you, after saying that you didn't want to traverse underneath that terrain, would you risk it for 5 turns? Oh, good, like crazy. No way. That's just insane. Why would I do that? And up there, it's like, yeah, well, it's a pretty good idea. Get 5 turns. High value.
So why do we make decisions that put us in harm's way, especially for 5 turns on a risky slope, especially when she would have said no way if you had asked her on the road prior to going up the mountain? On one hand, it's irrational, but the heart of the problem is pretty common. We often suffer from not asking this question. Why would we make bad decisions when the risks are so high?
And that's what we'll be discussing with our guest today.
Welcome to Behavioral Grooves. My name is Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. Behavioral Grooves is the podcast that shares discussions with researchers, authors, and practitioners about why we do what we do. And if you're new to Behavioral Grooves, welcome. We hope that you enjoy this episode.
Absolutely. And if you're a regular listener, thank you for your support. Now, Tim, getting back to our topic, if we're going to improve our decision making, we need to learn from experts. So who are we talking to in this episode?
Well, Kurt, today we are talking to Audun Hetland and Andrea Mannberg. They are researchers at the White Heat Project in Tromsø, Norway. The project is a collaboration between a group of researchers at the Arctic University of Norway, Montana State University, and Umeå University in Sweden. And their international team consists of researchers in economics, psychology, geography, snow science, and political science. They are studying the effects of positional preferences and bounded rationality on risk-taking behavior, and more specifically, skiing in avalanche terrain.
Well, first off, I'm glad that you got to say all of those names because I could never have pronounced them correctly.
That's why we do it this way.
So there we go. So Andrea is an economist and the project leader, and Audun is a psychologist on the team. We spoke with them about how this interdisciplinary team is helping backcountry skiers and mountaineers do a better job at managing their risk in avalanche terrain. And for Tim and me, their work has implications for the corporate leaders who make decisions about their budgets and their human resource opportunities. And in many situations, the consequences of these decisions can be quite high.
Yeah. Just in case you're not familiar with where Tromsø, Norway is located, it's a 2-hour flight north of the Arctic Circle. That means that during the winter, they experience 24 hours of blue darkness, and the light available for their ski season is regrettably pretty short.
Yeah. And so right now, when you're listening to this, if you're listening to it when it first comes out, they are in perpetual 24-hour darkness.
Yeah.
And now for people like me who enjoy a good long day of skiing, that's kind of a bummer. But not to draw the pity card, but hey, I'm just saying that a long day of skiing is better than a short day.
Agreed.
If I can make it that long. All right. But right now, we'd like you to sit back, relax, and enjoy a 2-finger pour of fresh backcountry powder. Actually, make that a 2-foot pour of backcountry powder and listen to our conversation with Andrea and Audun.
Audun Hetland and Andrea Mannberg, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are excited to have you here. We're going to get to talk about skiing and backcountry work and all this fun stuff. But before we do that, let's get into our speed round. So I'm going to have the first one, and Audun, I'm going to ask you. All right. So dinner with your favorite behavioral scientist or professional skier? Would you rather have? Which would be preferred?
Well, there is a lot of interesting skiers, but I kind of get enough of the skiers in my work. So, I leave them out.
Okay, good.
Okay,
good.
Very good. Very good. I'm going to address this to Andrea. Would you prefer to travel with no itinerary or a fixed itinerary?
Well, I am a control freak and I hate uncertainty. So I would probably go with a fixed one. But then I get crazy when I don't have my freedom. So that's tricky.
It's complicated.
It is very complicated. Oh my God, I'm such a square. But no, I think I'll go with a fixed because then I can use my energy to think about what I will do when I'm there.
Oh, good. Good.
Okay.
All right.
Good.
You thought about that one. I liked how you were processing the whole thing. I'm like, we have the freedom part, but I have this uncertainty is not good. So this is all good. All right. We'll ask this to both of you. So this one, you know, whoever wants to answer first, here you go. So coffee, tea, or some other drink. What would you prefer?
You're talking to Scandinavians.
Yes.
So
coffee.
We drink coffee. It's.
That's
but
what
I think that's given.
But I need beer.
I don't know.
You need beer.
I had other, so I thought, you know, it could be beer or vodka or something, you know.
I'm not a big vodka fan, but if you ask me, could I live without coffee? Could I live without beer? I would definitely go with beer because I can't go. I cannot live without beer.
Okay.
Even the one thing when I broke my legs, the one thing that got me off morphine was the thought that I could have beer. One addiction for another.
Wow. That's a whole podcast right there. That like we could dedicate a whole podcast episode just to that discussion. Okay. And this is going to be this is a toss up. So whoever wants to answer first. The question is, do public warnings about avalanche risk make a difference?
Yes.
Yes, they do.
All righty.
How so? What is it about the public warnings, and how does that impact people's risk? And actually, probably before we go into that, this is the area that you guys study. This is the piece that you are looking at, and the safety of people out when they're out skiing or hiking. And so you have a lot of background history in this. But tell us, what is it about the public warnings that help?
Avalanche terrain is difficult. It's an environment where you don't get feedback, so it's very difficult to know whether or not you did a correct decision. And making these decisions in avalanche terrain is quite complicated because there is a range of factors that you could consider. So it's the terrain, the steepness, it's the snow and the snow stability, and it's the past weather, and all of this kind of feeds into one kind of go or no go decision. And if you're going to make that decision with some kind of confidence, you need high quality information. And the avalanche warning bulletins is a very good source of information. So kind of background information. So you're able to make a way much better decision. So I think I think the avalanche bulletins, they were introduced in Norway now only in 2013. So we haven't had them for so long, but it has really made an impact on how people make decisions.
Okay.
Yeah, and another thing is that most people, I mean, in the backcountry, you of course have professionals, you have the experts, but I mean, most of us who are out there are novices. We don't know much, while the avalanche forecasters are experts. So they understand how, I mean, like the snow metamorphosis and how the weather works and so on. And they can translate that into something that we can grasp. So I think that's important, that we're novices and that we need help. I mean, I need help from doctors. If I need surgery, can't make up my mind how ill I am, and we get that from experts. In addition, I mean, when we think about avalanche warnings or avalanche forecasts, we usually just think about the number. It's avalanche danger 3 or 4. But usually the avalanche forecast is more of a discussion. Like, this is what we have observed, and this is what we think. This is the avalanche problems. So it's a whole lot more than just a number. A number sort of says, do I need to be scared? And the discussion tells me, what am I supposed to look for? So it's really helping us, the users of the backcountry, to get more information that we couldn't possibly gather unless we're out 100 days per year or 50 days per year.
I think it actually helps you learn, because then you have a description of what the professionals see as the challenges, and then you can go look for them and recognize them. So without that, it's complicated to know what to look for. It really makes learning easier, because it's you have kind of, you're eased into what the snow looks like and what you're looking for, and I think it also makes it more interesting for a lot of people, because then you can read the forecast and see if you can find the same issues and track them. So I think the avalanche bulletin, they really make a difference. I think about them like the weather forecast that was introduced more than 100 years ago in Norway, because back then it was very dangerous to be a fisherman, because you didn't know how the weather would change. But the introduction of the weather forecast really made a difference, and I think we see some of the same things in avalanche terrain.
Well, it was interesting, and I think you answered my question there, is just this idea, well, if they're novices going out there, how well do they interpret those warnings and the numbers and what's going on with those, as opposed to a professional who goes, oh, well, I get this now, I see this and I understand it. If we're novices and we don't have that history or the knowledge base to be able to build from. But it sounds like you're almost saying it's almost a learning opportunity, because you can look and see, oh, here are these snow conditions that they talked about, and this is what that looks like. This is what that appears to be. So now I am learning this as I'm moving forward. Is that, did I capture that right?
I think you definitely captured it right. And then if you think about these bulletins, they're kind of formed as a pyramid. And it starts with the most simple information, and then it grows in detail. So you could get away with, in the beginning, there is a warning, a number between 1 and 5, and then 5 is never used. So it's really between 1 and 4. But then if you go further down, you have a description of the reason why there is an avalanche danger, and we call that the avalanche problem. And then further down, you have a description of the snow and the snow layers, and then the weather in the mountains, the past, and the forecast for weather, mountain weather. So it is definitely a kind of a learning possibility, and you have a bit of background, because if not, you're quite blank.
Okay.
I was just thinking that, of course, I think that it's important. I think it helps. But of course, it can also create problems. I mean, when you talk about the novices, how do we interpret this? And this means that we know that risk communication is hard. It's not easy to communicate risk. I mean, just think about the situation we're in now with COVID. But just like with, I mean, I usually think when I go driving my car and I see a speed limit, I take that as an indication that here I should at least drive the speed limit, right? Regardless if it's dark and icy. And I should really sort of go like, wait, okay. And of course, you can do that with the avalanche forecast as well. As you see, it's a level 2. And level 2 means that it's a low probability, usually. But it can mean that it's a low probability of a huge avalanche, if we have a persistent weak layer, for example, or it can be a slightly higher probability for many small avalanches. And if you just think that if you oversimplify it and you go like, it's a level 2, so today I can do whatever I want, or level 1, I mean, a level 1 could be, in general, it's very stable. But if you're sitting underneath a slope where the sun hits really hard, especially if you go, say, in Colorado or the Tetons or whatever, and the sun hits, I mean, that could be super dangerous if you're there at the wrong time of the day. So you still need to know. And I know that I would say that we still don't know exactly how people interpret the avalanche forecast. And there's also, if you just look at the United States, compare in Bozeman and the Bridgers to the Sawtooth, to Colorado, the avalanche forecast, or to Norway, they look very different. So I think that we're still sort of trying to find a way. We still need to really study how people use it. But I definitely think it's a good idea that we have them.
Yeah.
You mentioned this idea of using a discussion and opening up more information that can be used positively for learning. I would also be concerned that it might also give rise to more motivated thinking. That you might, you're right, that someone who is really bent on getting out into the backcountry today looks at a level 2 and says, I can manage this. I can deal with this. To what degree do you think that's a problem or a challenge with the way these warnings are presented?
I mean, there has been a discussion about this in Norway, that we present the avalanche forecast that this is how the danger is going to be, that it persuades a message of more control than we actually have. And I think that is something that we should be observant about. But I haven't studied this, so I can't say it, but I think it's definitely possible to, I mean, if you describe a persistent weak layer, you're saying that it's really hard. I mean, a persistent weak layer, basically what that is that you get very few signs of danger. And you have to hit a trigger point. And you don't know where that trigger point is. So it's basically, you're going out into a minefield, and you have to find your way. And you have no idea where the mines are. If you describe that in the forecast, and I can choose to stay on a different field where there are no mines, I would go there, which is basically not avalanche terrain in that case, or if it's in a certain aspect or in a certain elevation. I think it's very important what we write in the forecast.
Yeah. Well, language obviously portrays, right? We know framing really impacts people's perception of risk. And so if you frame something as a 20% chance of danger or an 80% chance of success, this is the same information, but people interpret it different. So what are you seeing? Are you seeing that people are that these frames are being done appropriately? You said it's different across the board. Is that part different? Is it just how it's presented that is different across the board when we think about this? Go ahead, Audun.
It's interesting that you ask about framing, because we just completed a study, and in that study we presented people, skiers, with 10 different scenarios, ranging from the absolute safe to the absolute dangerous, and we asked half the participants, and we have about 2,000 participants answering this. So it's half of the participants, how safe is this, from 1 to 7? So that's one frame. And then the other half, they were asked, how dangerous is this? And in the beginning, we thought of this as not as a framing effect, but as a priming effect. So we thought that we would prime people saying that, okay, so how dangerous is this? And we would expect them to say that, yeah, this is dangerous. You say it's dangerous, or priming them with safe. But it works the other way around. And we've done the study kind of 6 times, and it replicates again and again and again. If we ask people how safe is this, you start to look for signs of safety. But these scenarios and avalanche terrain in general it's ambiguous. So it's really difficult to say that it's safe. You can't say with 100%. And then people compensate and say, okay, so I can't say it's safe. So it's rather towards dangerous. And if we ask people, how dangerous is this? You start to look for danger signs, and you can't say, it isn't. I can't say it's 100% dangerous. So I guess it's safe. So just by asking, okay, is this dangerous? Well, that's not a good idea. If we can ask people, okay, is this safe? And to kind of to follow that thought into avalanche terrain, if you ask yourself, if you stand there and have to make a decision, and you ask yourself, so is this dangerous? Well, if you're not knowledgeable enough, or if you're too tired, or if there is any reason that you can't observe the signs of danger, it's obviously safe, because then you have to prove it's dangerous. But if you ask the question, okay, is this safe? Well, then if you can't find reasons for it being safe, then it's obviously dangerous. So we're trying to kind of really doing an effort trying to communicate this to the avalanche community, that ask not, is this dangerous, but ask instead, is this safe?
Wow.
And then we definitely encourage people to argue for it. So tell me your arguments, because if people can talk about avalanche terrain, then we know that it's in the front of their mind, and it gets focused.
Well, one of the things I know, so in conversations around this, avalanche training used to focus just in on the ski conditions, right? The weather conditions, the snow conditions, etc. And yet many of the dangers are not the physical dangers, it's the mental dangers, right? That people have. We get excited and different things. So how are you guys looking at that? I mean, are you looking at when you're thinking about these types of situations that could be dangerous or not safe, right? How are you taking into account our mental thing? I mean, you talked about being tired, you talked about, other things, but there's also that powder fever that people get. There's this, all right, I'm going to look for, Tim mentioned motivated reasoning, right? I'm almost to the peak. I want to get there, but now I'm going to disregard some of these other things. What goes on in people, and how do you guys account for that? And I don't know, Andrea, do you want to start that?
So do you mean what we've found, or I'm not sure that I understood exactly your question. Can you rephrase it?
It wasn't really much of a question there. So what?
No.
Go ahead, Audun. You can go ahead.
No, but if you think about the environment is it's complicated, and you're right. In this field, the focus has been on kind of the hard sciences, so the snow physics and the mechanics, and the idea has been that as long as we can understand how the snow physics, then the problem with avalanches should be solved. But then when you look at the statistics, 9 out of 10 avalanche fatalities, they are triggered by the victim or somebody in their group. So it all kind of leads down to decisions before that avalanche. So if we can improve decision making, then we can change that fatality rate. And I think when this sunk in, 15, 20 years ago in the avalanche community, human factor really became kind of a hot potato that we should look at. And there is kind of a range of human factors, and our focus is on human factors, and it's everything from, you talk about motivated reasoning. It's motivation. It's communication. It's how we understand information. It's group dynamics. It's if you're tired and hungry, and so all of this kind of feeds in, and I think we can talk an hour on each of them, but it's we focus on a lot of them.
Yeah.
And one ongoing research is we've asked ourselves, how does fatigue does that play a role? Because we think that in avalanche terrain, the decisions need to be rational, because it's difficult to, since you don't get any feedback, it's difficult to kind of develop a good intuition. And since the dangers are not easy to spot, it's people are not particularly scared of avalanches because you can't see them. So it looks very nice. So you're left with kind of rational decision making, which is complicated. And we ask ourselves the question: okay, you're going to do quite complicated rational decision making, but not with being fresh and warm. You're going to be cold. You're going to be tired. You're going to be exhausted. Do you have the same abilities to do that when you're tired? So we've had people running for 2 hours on a treadmill and performing cognitive tests, and you're not as good when your heartbeat is up and when you get tired. And this is something that is of interest, because the mountains, they get steeper and steeper and steeper. So you're in the steepest part, the heaviest part, and that's when you're going to make a kind of go and no-go decision with a potentially fatal outcome. Yeah. But one thing that came out of that was that if you're fit, then you're not as affected. So we've said, stay fit or go slow. And so people that are fit, they can do both. But if you're unfit, then you're most affected.
And another striking feature or effect or result that we found was that even because you get your heart rate up, right? And it's not hard to imagine that you can make a good decision when you're like. But the thing was that even after people had rested for a while, so their pulse had gone down, they still made pretty poor decisions, or they performed poorly on the tasks. So and the fit people got the cognitive skills back faster than the unfit people. So that was also I think that was a bit unexpected, that you didn't sort of get back to your smart self.
Wow. Yeah, you kind of can. You can make that judgment of going, yeah, I can understand being tired, and as you said, your heart beats up and you're going to make poor decisions. But if you give me 5 minutes to rest, I should be fine if I'm back down there. That isn't as intuitive. So that's a really insightful finding.
Yeah. I wanted to get to this idea of this decision making, and Andrea, some of your work has been influenced by work by George Lowenstein and Dan Ariely in hot states versus cold states in sexual environments, right? And what are you guys laughing about?
This is good research.
This is good research.
Andrea, she's been studying sexual risk taking, not on a personal level, but as
well, that too.
but it is very interesting to have Andrea's kind of background and approach, and then looking at avalanche terrain.
Andrea, so
Yeah.
back to the question. Given powder fever, and the way people backcountry skiers respond so vividly and viscerally to this desire to take more risks, and I think you've talked about skiing is a voluntary risk taking, right? So tell us about the correlations between these hot states and cold states that we see both in sexual activity and among the powder seekers, basically.
When we're so the basic idea is that, I mean, when I'm at home, so I'm going to start with sex, of course. I like sex, but I mean, when I'm at home, I want to have sex, but I know that if I go out and have casual sex, there's a risk attached to it. And it's the same if I have sex with my partner. I could get pregnant if I don't want to. And when I'm cold, I'm an economist. Of course, I'm thinking about the cost and benefits. So basically, the benefits of having sex is without protection is that it's very pleasurable. There are no interruptions and so on. The negative effects is in the future when I get an STD or get pregnant or something like that. And of course, I can reduce that risk by using a condom, say, or abstaining from sex even harder. And when I'm sitting at home and I'm doing sort of thinking, should I have unprotected sex? If I'm going to a bar, should I have unprotected sex with someone that I don't know? It's fairly easy to think that, I'm going to use a condom, right? It's a smart thing to do. How hard is it? And it reduces pleasure. But if I'm I was in Malawi in 2004, and the HIV frequency was 15% in the population. But there were certainly subsamples where the frequency was a lot higher, for example, amongst commercial sex workers. And people still had, and in the US, people still have unprotected sex. And like in the US, the rate of herpes, genital herpes, is high. The last time I checked, it was like 16%, which is, wow. That's a lot. I don't want to get that, right? And we still have unprotected sex because when we get aroused, all we can think about is satisfying our needs right here and now, right? I can't think about tomorrow. That just becomes completely unimportant. And that is something good because it makes us focus on what we need. I mean, when I'm hungry, I just want to get something to eat. When I'm angry, I just want to slap someone. But I don't think about the consequences because I get really excited. Now, in avalanche terrain, we're also doing something because we think that it's pleasurable. I like to ski powder. And there is a risk associated with it, both avalanches or hitting a tree or falling or whatever. So I started thinking, I actually read the paper by George Lowenstein and Daniel Ariely a long time ago. They did a study in Berkeley where they asked normal college guys to first answer a survey concerning social norms, what they thought that they would do if they would try to convince someone to have sex with them, if they would use date drugs. So norm violating behavior. And most of them said, no way, I'm not going to do that. That is despicable. And then they gave them porn on a computer that was covered in plastic. And they asked them to watch that porn. And then when they were about to ejaculate, they weren't allowed to, and they had to answer the same questions. And what they found was that these completely normal guys, they said that it would be okay to use date drugs. They would definitely not take no for an answer. They found cigarette butts to be very sexy. They wanted to have sex with really ugly people. The only thing that didn't change, that heterosexuals didn't become homosexuals. Now I know that in the backcountry we're not aroused to the same extent as we are when having sex, but we still wanted to sort of what does powder fever do with us? So we collaborated This was a collaboration with Jordi Hendricks and Jerry Johnson at Montana State University. Jordi Hendricks is a snow scientist and a geographer. And they went up to Bridger Bowl, which is a ski resort, absolutely fantastic ski resort. And there's a ski lift there called Slushman's, which is really on the border between the controlled terrain and the uncontrolled terrain. And it's off-piste in the sense that it's not groomed. It's kind of complex terrain. And they asked people to answer a short survey that was sort of the ski version of George and Daniel Ariely's survey in the ski lift. And then we asked them to take the survey again at home. And the thing is, we actually found very few effects. We thought that we would see fairly high effects. So we asked them, would you consider going out without wearing a beacon? That would be without using a condom. Would you persuade a partner who's scared? Would you go skiing in uncontrolled terrain with someone whose skills are unknown to you, or who is not wearing a beacon? Would you go alone? I think that one of the problems with our survey was that most of the questions were just out of the question for anyone, hot or cold state. Because what we saw was that on the more sort of vague questions, like would you go skiing with someone whose skills are unknown to you, we actually did see an effect. That people were more willing. They would say, yeah, whatever, I will go when they were in a hot state. But for the most of the questions, we actually did not see much of an effect. So either our questions were too strong, or people are very aware about powder fever and respond to it in the backcountry. And I think we just need to look into it a bit further.
What I take away from this is that in the avalanche community, there is a very strong culture for safety, and there is also a very good culture for kind of taking care of each other. And it seems like if we look at the question and the results from this survey and this study with these eyes, that what we find is that we find no results is actually quite positive. It makes us happy.
It is.
Because then it means that people in avalanche terrain, they take this seriously, and even though they really, really want to go skiing, you won't push your partner to do stuff that he wouldn't, and you wouldn't go without your safety equipment. And I think that's really a good thing.
Well, I was wondering if part of this, and then again, this just came as you were talking, Andrea, is just this idea that they're riding up a chairlift. And so it's different than if they were, putting on skins and hiking up, a mountain, and they put in 2 hours, 3 hours of work in order to get up there. And then something, that there's a different level of investment in this. They can still go down at Bridger Bowl, if I remember that I'm not sure exactly which lift it is, but going down on the groomed slate trails are still pretty fun. So you're not necessarily the trade-off there is oh yeah, it could be cool going down there, but I still get this thrill of being able to ski some pretty decent terrain over here. That's more.
No, safe. I think that you're hitting a very important point, both that we're doing this in an area where you can actually ride controlled terrain, not without a beacon, but you can ride controlled terrain where it's very close to help. All the ungroomed parts. It's very complex terrain, but the ungroomed parts are pretty short. And you're also touching on a very important aspect that you have in avalanche terrain, which is what we economists call sunk costs. That you make these investments that you can't get back. And not skiing that run, you tend to see it as a loss, and to avoid losing out, you might be a tendency to sort of being willing to take bigger chances. This is actually a project we haven't done any studies yet, but we're trying to to create some kind of computer game to test that idea in avalanche terrain, to see, together with George Lowenstein, to see how that affects us, because I think that's a huge thing. It's not only that we invest a lot of time and energy to get up the mountains, but also, I mean, we're lucky enough to live in Tromsø, where we have avalanche terrain, or avalanche and safe terrain just outside our doors. But most people actually have they have to travel by airplanes, go far distances. And we do see that tourists are overrepresented in avalanche accidents up here. We don't know the exact reason for that, so it's only anecdotal, but I think that's super important.
Yeah, that does make a difference, right? If you've been on an airplane for 2 or 3 hours, and then you had to drive in a car for another 3 or 4 hours, and you had to rent a place and do all these kinds of things, the loss aversion would be significantly higher, wouldn't it?
It would. And I usually take up. I have most of my research is sort of funded in my own experiences, but I was involved in an avalanche accident 6 years ago, and I did just that. So we had traveled to this remote village in Sweden, and the weather, we didn't have an avalanche forecast. So this is one of the things about avalanche forecast as well. We didn't have one. We just knew that it'd been snowing quite a lot. And we decided that we would go into terrain that we didn't know. We were hiking up a fairly safe ridge to check out a run. And our plan was, if the run didn't look good, we would turn back and go down the safe ridge again. And on our way up, we got several really big collapses. Like the whole snowbank just collapsed, and the snow was coming down from the trees. But we're on this safe ridge, so we're like, oh, but we can continue. We come up, and we notice that the terrain above us, the alpine terrain, it's a lot steeper than we thought, and it was really poor visibility. And we could see the run that we had planned to ride. That it was a terrain trap. We didn't know where it would go, so we decided we wouldn't want to do that. And so we discussed what to do next, and we wanted to get to a place where you were safe, so get some skiing before we would drive 5 hours back to Umeå, where I was living in Sweden. And we were absolutely we agreed that we didn't want to the closest way was to traverse underneath the steep terrain. We didn't want to do that because we agreed that we could remotely trigger an avalanche. But this ridge, it was just like, it was so boring to sort of walk down it because we could have taken our skins off, but we would have had to use our poles. So instead we decided that, but if we go up, say, 20 vertical meters, we can get 5 good turns. So we do that, and the whole mountainside collapses, and the crack propagates uphill. And this avalanche that we remotely triggered, I've heard 300 meters, I heard 500 meters wide, and it went 300 to 500 meters long. It took huge trees. And we were hit. This was a 2-meter wave that just came down the mountain, hit us over our head, threw us into the trees. And by a miracle, we all survived. But I mean, for me, that was just like, if you would ask me on the road or back in Umeå, would you, after saying that you didn't want to traverse underneath that terrain, would you risk it for 5 turns? Oh, good, like crazy. No way. That's just insane. Why would I do that? And up there, it's like, yeah, well, it's a pretty good idea. 5 turns, high value.
Yeah, those 5 turns become much more valuable in the moment than they do by any other means that you're looking for. But you bring up a really interesting piece, right? It's like you've studied this stuff. You know this stuff. It's not like this was a novice going up there and not understanding all of these things. And yet it was still one of those factors that comes into play. And I go back, as much as we know things, the knowledge in and of itself isn't necessarily enough to really change behavior. So what are the things that you guys are doing? Like what are the kind of elements that you're trying to work with? Obviously knowledge is one of them, and that can hopefully it does help, but it isn't always sufficient, right? So are there other ways that you guys are working with people and or looking at things that might help in changing behavior in those types of situations?
I think the strategies are very important. Like having, there's a lot of work going on at the Max Planck Institute in Germany on like having if so strategies, so that I'm coming back to the sex. If you made your decision, if I meet someone, I'm going to use a condom, and I have the condom in my pocket and I've practiced with it, it's much more likely that I'm actually going to use it than if I have to go to the store and get it. And I've never put it on, especially for a girl in sex. I realized if I'm very good at putting on condoms, they're getting used. If I'm not, they're not getting used. In the same way in the backcountry, if you have a strategy and you practice, for us, we should have had a decent plan B. So, if this looks bad, we're going to do this. And this is actually a decent idea. And if we make a decision, we should always take another round thinking, why is this safe? So why is this safe as a strategy?
You're asking what can be done. And I think before kind of pointing out some of the strategies and what could be promising, it could be an idea to kind of elaborate on some of the problem, because it's like in Andrea's accident. If you don't kind of feel the dangers, then there isn't kind of any emotional alarm going off, and if you don't feel them, it's so easy to kind of convince yourself that this is okay. I can continue to do this because emotionally I don't feel it, and then you're stuck with our fairly kind of limited rational ability, and this, I think, is a huge challenge in these kind of environments. You would have the same thing in high altitude climbing, for example, high altitude alpinism. It's my best friend. He was on K2 in 2008, and if you look at the statistics at K2, it's just horrifying. There is a 1 in 5 chance of dying. So for every 100 that returns from the summit after successfully summiting, 25 have died trying. And he said to me, so it's okay, yeah, one out of 5 dies. Huh. It's good that we're just 4 on the team. And then they left. And it didn't work out. Just 3 of them came back home. And in the course of 30 hours, 11 climbers died. But we've been talking about this over and over again, and just what happened. But if you can't feel it, then it's so easy to kind of convince yourself that this is okay. And I think this is one of the challenges we face in avalanche terrain, because it's the dangers are hidden, and there isn't any emotional alarm going off. And then I've studied skiers to figure out how does it feel to ski. So I mounted facial cameras on skiers. So I've seen hundreds of hours of facial expressions, and we run that through a computer program which could kind of extract emotions. And they don't feel a lot of fear. It's not much at all. And when we have kind of readings of fear, that is when you ski fast and you're about to fall. Then the fear kicks in. But in avalanche terrain, people don't die by falling. They die in avalanches. But avalanches, it's kind of an abstract risk. And when you don't see it, then it's it's difficult to kind of take it serious enough. So I have a very short career as a base jumper, and because I was studying base jumpers, and I became one of them for a few weeks. It's a horrible experience and not recommended, but it's very interesting to look at base jumpers and see how they make their risk judgments, because it's very simple. How much altitude do I have before I hit the rocks, and what's the wind at the landing area, and that altitude doesn't change. Rocks are stable, so it's very easy. But they spend so much time thinking back and forth, and that's because they're petrified. And then I switch from that and then start to following people in avalanche terrain, and they have to do complicated risk assessments and judgments. And very often it's just, this feels fine. Well, without feedback, you can't train that gut feeling, and so I don't trust that. And so, the lack of fear is maybe one of the challenges here.
Well, I think before we got on, we were talking about some of this. It's a wicked learning experience, right? This idea that you don't get this feedback, right? You can go down a hill and you do everything wrong and you get lucky, right? And you don't trigger an avalanche. And you also talked about this idea that, look, we've evolved to be afraid of snakes. We've evolved to be afraid of heights, right? So jumping off of a cliff is not something that you would normally do. Just regular, we have an innate fear against that. Snow, that doesn't necessarily trigger that innate fear. So what you're saying, I think, is really true, and it kind of correlates to some of the stuff with coronavirus, right? You can't see the viruses. People are going about safe, and they don't have any symptoms. They're not oozing things out or coughing, terribly. They're just going about, and so we don't necessarily take those risks as an emotional risk, right? That they don't have that same emotional response, and so then we can rationalize those things away a lot more.
Yeah, and we don't feel them. And another thing with avalanche terrain is that, most of us have had like nasty experiences, and we learn from them. And I know that I don't want to get the coronavirus because I've had other diseases. And I hate being out of breath. So, and now I know a lot of people who's had it, so I can sort of learn from that. But in avalanche terrain, very few of us have had the privilege to get caught and almost killed, but survive. So it's very hard for us to, we sort of don't get like, first we get the small avalanche, and it hurts a bit, and then we break our legs, and then we sort of move on. We get hit and we get killed. So we don't learn. That's a problem. We don't get that feedback.
One of our colleagues, he brings a baseball bat to his avalanche courses. He has a lot of avalanche courses for snowmobilers, and they ride a snowmobile in the forest. And so he starts up with this baseball bat, just asks, so can I hit your legs? Just really hard. Just no. But come on, just a couple of hits, just a whack of it. No, of course you can't. You sure? It's just, you don't want that. No, because that's what's going to happen if you get caught by an avalanche and washed through those forests. It's going to be really bad. In addition, you can drown in the snow. And I think just that it's difficult to picture what could happen. And so I don't know. I don't think he has been allowed to hit somebody yet, but it's just that image of that baseball bat. Just maybe that gets you thinking. So I think that the link to the coronavirus is very interesting, because I think we're seeing pretty much the same thing.
It sounds like survivorship bias to some degree.
It does, because if you get away and nothing happens, so if you make if you make a really bad decision, but nothing happens, and you get back down, then the absence of a catastrophe, it's very difficult not to take that into account for making a good decision. So, and we talked to a lot of people, and for a long time, for some time, I was interested in motivation and how does it feel, and why do we keep on skiing, and some of the first answers are kind of the feeling of skiing, the kind of dancing in the snow, and it's being with friends and being out in nature and all of that. But later, I would very often get this response. It's also very nice to be able to make good decisions in avalanche terrain. And I said, well, that's really interesting. How do you know they're good? Oh, because I didn't trigger any avalanches. Well, but was that because you were lucky, or because you did a very good judgment? And they say, well, I haven't thought about that. No, but if we kind of continue to to build our experience and our kind of confidence on the lack of catastrophes, then you end up with an inflated belief in your own abilities, and that isn't healthy in the long run.
Sounds like someone who recently got COVID. Someone who lives in the White House in the United States got COVID and was healed by the magic power of some of the best medicine on the planet, and said, "See, it was nothing."
Yeah.
Well, it's also we've interviewed Annie Duke a couple different times, and she's wrote Thinking in Bets, and she talks about that. She calls it outcome bias is that she renamed it resulting, right? This idea that we look at the result and go, oh, well, it's a good result, I must have made good decisions, when in fact luck plays in. She used to be a professional poker player, and so she knows that, look, it's an 80% chance here, but 20% of the times that's going to be a bad decision. Well, when you play enough hands, 20% shows up a lot. And so all of a sudden you can start learning again. The interesting piece here is that you're saying, we're not playing enough hands with this to be able to learn those. We're just learning from those times where we've actually experienced the good piece. Like, it's like, oh, well, I've ran through red lights, 3 times and I've never gotten hit, so it must be safe. Well, no, actually running through a red light is not safe. It is really dangerous. You got lucky. And, going down that hill 3 times is the same thing. Yeah.
And I mean, I think that is really going on in avalanche terrain. And the one thing is that we tend to attribute our own successes to good decisions, and our mishaps to being unlucky. I'm not sure it's correct to say the flip side, but the other side of that is that when we look at others, we take a completely different stance. And I think that Annie Duke talked about that too on your podcast, which was a really good show, by the way. When we look at others, if they got away with something, they were lucky. And if something bad happened, it was because they made poor decisions. And we see that a lot in like Facebook groups, where someone had a near-miss accident or an accident, that people are really fast at judging and saying, how could they go there on those conditions? And I've definitely seen people that I know was out in similar terrain the same day, and they got away with it. And they're still sort of commenting about the poor decisions. And the problem with that is that if we have that stance, because even if I don't experience an avalanche accident, I can read about others' experiences. But I can only learn from that if I give them the benefit of the doubt and see how hard it was for them to make the right decisions, and also put myself in that situation and think about all the times when I've been in similar situations, made the same decisions and got lucky. And we actually... we've done a few studies, but we're collecting more data. But our preliminary results show that we asked people about the degree of control that they have when they're judging avalanche danger, and the degree of control that they think that comparable others have. And there's a huge difference. They tend to say that others get lucky, others don't have control, others make poor decisions. Well, I have control. I don't rely on luck, and I make good decisions. And that is, I think that's a problem, and I think that we could definitely improve avalanche training by training people to sort of put themselves in the other person's shoes, and also thinking about. So Scott Savage at the Sawtooth Avalanche Center is a super interesting guy. He has this strategy that he asks himself when he's the top of a run. So if I go down here, what would the if I make the decision to go, how would the avalanche accident report read? And I think that's brilliant, because that really sort of, because if you read avalanche accident reports, that it says all the mistakes. And I do that now. I'm like, okay, no, I can't go because that would be too embarrassing. Even if I'm dead, I would turn in my grave.
I think that's something to take away, that we're more concerned about our own kind of social stand than if we live or die.
Yes.
I mean, that's true, though, right? I mean, we are social creatures, and we put a lot of emphasis on how others view us, and there's a big piece there. And it is also interesting. I think part of this, it has to deal with the likelihood of an actual accident, right? And so, given, like you said, the various levels, and you're at a level 2, and the probability is low, but there's still a probability there. And then, so if it does happen, that can be very catastrophic on that piece. So it's like a black swan, unlikely event, but with big consequences on the end. And so again, we can discount those, right? We look out and we go, oh, that's the likelihood of that is so small that I don't even have to worry about it. Even when that's not necessarily the case, because of the outcome that could potentially happen with that.
If we're thinking about how could we kind of make people more able to make good decisions. Earlier today, I had a lengthy discussion with a Norwegian filmmaker and skier, Nikolai Schirmer, and he's getting big over with you guys too. And he had a very interesting reflection, because he said that I've been skiing together with novices quite a lot, and very often they put themselves in risk, which they don't realize. So I put myself in risk all the time, and I know that. And sometimes I even think that, yes, the probability for an avalanche in this side of this slab is quite high, but the run out is clean, and I have people here to dig me up, and so I can still try, and he's a very good skier, so they can sometimes outrun it. So but if you don't kind of realize the risk you're in, you're unable to do anything with it, and so just being aware of, when do I actually expose myself to risk, even though it's small. If you are able to kind of see that, you can do something with it. If you're not, then
kind of a Dunning-Kruger effect of avalanche safety, right? So
definitely.
Yeah. I know Tim is looking to talk music, so I can tell his facial expression changes.
We're fortunate enough to have an amazing piece of technology that's enabling us to talk to you in the Arctic Circle. You're in Tromsø, Norway, and way north and way cold. And very shortly, you're going to be entering a couple months of dark days, right?
Yep.
What will you be listening to for music? Does your playlist change as you get into darker days?
I think it does. Yeah. I know it does. And you guys, you should come up here when it's dark, because if I had to choose one season for the upcoming 12 months, I think I would actually choose midwinter, when it's really dark.
Why is
Andrea,
that?
No, Andrea really disagrees with me. So it's so she thinks I'm an idiot, but that's fine. No, but if you're here in midwinter, you have a lot of northern lights. You have the stars, you have the moon, and you have all these bluish colors, and that's just fantastic. That kind of sets the tone for more slow-paced life. It really makes a difference. Yeah, my playlist. It's I'm kind of entering that. I'm listening to a Norwegian band. It's called Folk og Røver. So it's people and bandits. It's really neat, groovy. So it's I like that. It's
good. Andrea, you are disagreeing vehemently about this choosing midwinter versus midsummer, I'm guessing, is the alternative. What?
Yeah. No, I like the light. I mean, I do appreciate the darkness. It's cozy, but I get really tired. I do. But I mean, I agree with Audun that the northern lights and the stars and the snow is absolutely beautiful, but I like long days. It's definitely like everything slows down in the dark times. So I turn to get cozy and listen to John Coltrane and Miles Davis and the slower versions of Tom Waits. Not the really. I like Tom Waits, all the stuff that he's made, but I tend to listen to the more melodic parts of Tom Waits.
Well, he knows how to get dark too. Tom Waits,
he
absolutely. He knows how to.
mood.
Yep, he can dive deep on that. We oftentimes talk to our guests about whether or not they have music playing when they work, and I'm interested in both of your responses on that. Audun, would you go first on that?
Yeah, I do. I have a working working music, but particularly when I write, because it is to block out everything, and it's non-vocal, and it's again a Norwegian. It's kind of techno-ish. It's called. I have kind of one favorite album, and the artist is Filter. And it's really, really neat because I can put that on my ears and then I'm able to focus. But except from that, it's there's so much going on that I'm unable to listen to music. So it's just those particular times.
Interesting. Andrea?
I don't actually. I used to way back, but I felt that I couldn't focus enough. So I don't. Now when I'm working from home, I get so restless that I have to get up and dance. My partner has built this awesome loudspeakers, so I can get like a disco at home. So then I can take a break and just jump up and down and get some energy. And then so that's when I listen to music when I work, when I'm not working.
And what do you like to dance to?
Something with a lot of something fast with a lot of beat. It's usually a mix between ska and punk and rock, I guess, like White Stripes. And then there's this Swedish band called Monster that sounds a bit like The Clash that I used to dance to, especially this spring during when we stayed at home.
Oh, fantastic.
You and Annie Duke would hit it off. She's a big fan of Jack White and the White Stripes. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Very, really nice.
Yeah.
Well, both of you, thank you. This has been very interesting. I'm super excited to get this out there because I think it's important stuff, but I think the research that both of you are doing really interesting on this. And again, it parlays itself into avalanche training and avalanche terrain and all those, but you can take these lessons and probably apply them to a much bigger part of our lives as we think about things. And so I think this has been really fantastic.
It was super fun to be here.
I think we have the best lab in the world. To be honest, it's we have thousands of people going out there in the different constellations that are making kind of high risk judgments under uncertainty, and they more than willing participate. So it's to us, it's just fantastic. So, but thank you very much for having us.
It was a lot of fun, and we didn't even get into the social effects. We forgot about that.
Didn't. We'll have to have you back. There is definitely more to talk about.
Welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I groove on what we learned from our conversation with Andrea and Audun and have a free-flowing discussion and talk about whatever else comes into our snow-addled, crazed minds.
Snow-addled minds. Have you ever had snow-addling? Have you
Snow
been addled?
fever? Snow fever?
Powder fever?
Powder fever. That's what I should have said.
Yeah.
Our powder fevered brains. All right, let's redo this. Here we go. In our powder. No. There we go. No, there is an aspect of that, right? For skiers, if anybody is a skier who's listening, you know there's that moment where there's fresh powder. You're up there and you want to be first tracks. You want to get that feeling of floating and just being the first ones out there and doing those things. And you don't always take into consideration the risk. Now, most of the skiing that I do is all in controlled terrain that, yes, there's risk, but it's not necessarily a risk from an avalanche. It's a risk of me saying, I can do this, and I really can't do it because the terrain is too difficult, or
even when you're on the groomed trails. Right?
Well, the times when I've gotten hurt skiing, I broke my leg once, and I tore an MCL another time. They were on the last run of the day. For the MCL, it was the green run at the end of the day when we had been skiing black diamonds all day long, and I had just let down my guard. And skiing on the green at the end of the day, you're tired, you're not really paying attention, and boom, all of a sudden, snap, and you feel it right away. Same thing, in breaking my leg, last run of the day, going down what would have been a typically normal everyday run, but I got heated because this guy that it's a high school senior ski trip, right? In high school, taught my friend how to ski in the morning. He had never skied before. I had skied a lot, left him for most of the afternoon, went with other skiers who were good skiers, came back, met up with him at the last run at the top. And he goes, "Hey, Kurt, watch this." And then he goes and he's improved. He's had another 2-3 hours of skiing. He's drastically improved how he did. So of course, being the even keeled, wonderfully rational person that I am, I go, "Oh, that's wonderful," and gave him a little applause. No, I pull into a tuck and I go and I have to beat him down the hill because there's no way I'm going to let Dave beat me down the hill.
Novice beat you, right?
Exactly. And then I go, "Oh, there's a jump. I'm going to show him off," and I hit the jump. And of course, at the end of the day, conditions have all changed. It's all icy. And I land, I slide, smack my leg into a 4x4 post, and realized right away that I was an idiot. There you go.
I have two things to say about that. The first thing is that I'm glad that both of those major injuries were the last run of the day, that you didn't get up and do it again. There wasn't more after you are self-destructing on the slopes.
I suppose you're right. It would have been the last run of the day if it would have been the first run or the closing time. But to that point, yes.
Yeah, I'm hoping that you wouldn't have gotten up and done more. The second thing is that what a great example of our bounded rationality and how we let emotions get in our way, and how Seinfeld's nighttime guy seemed to overcome your morning guy in that situation.
Afternoon guy versus morning guy, right?
Right.
Morning guy, I'm training. We're going very cautiously. I'm showing all of this. Afternoon guy, no, not like that at all. No. All right. So Tim, what are some of the things that you took from this conversation? I mean, there's so much we could cover. It was
conversation.
Amazing. And again, what I love about this is, and it's just like our, with our conversation with Chris Brown, who talked about avalanches, is the insights are specific to our behavior in these high risk mountain situations, but the actual behavioral science behind it applies to everyday life. It happens in our business, in our personal lives, driving a car down the road. These are big time areas where there's risk involved, and yet we don't necessarily follow what we would do, as you said, morning guy versus nighttime guy.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think we can bounce around because there's so much to talk about here. But the idea that novices need to learn from experts is something that I think we're too aggressive in thinking, oh, I'm better than I really am. and we can learn from experts and use expert information in a really positive way, the same way that fishermen learned about when it's safe to go out and do your fishing based on a weather forecast. So we've got professionals from the Weather Service that are helping fishermen. So we can actually take outside experts to learn about how we could do our own job better. Team leaders, corporate leaders can learn from outside experts about how they could actually apply their world and make it better and safer and make better decisions in their day-to-day jobs.
Yeah. So are you saying that people have this Dunning-Kruger effect, that they are slightly knowledgeable and they assume much more? But you're very true. I think there's an aspect of this. And what are those experts? What are the experts that we can learn from? And particularly in some of these situations that involve humans where we go, oh, I know what to do. I think back, I've done a lot of team building work and different pieces. And I will tell you, a lot of executives go, I can build a team. And you sit there and you look at what they're doing and they're trying, but their behaviors are actually contrary to what would make a good team. And so learning from some experts in those types of situations, learning from other, you can look at economists. What can you take if you're trying to make some business decisions? If you're a business leader, what can economists teach you? And looking at the future, what can you learn from, others who are in different industries? All of these different pieces.
Right. Behavioral scientists in general, right? Sociologists, psychologists, neuroscientists, economists, they can all add to our the vocabulary and how we talk about things at work, and I think in a really positive way. And if you're in the airline industry, you might be able to learn something from someone in the shipping industry. And if you're in the shipping industry, you might be able to learn something from someone in the financial services industry.
Mm-hmm.
These are cross-pollinations can be really, really powerful.
Yeah.
And also kind of linked to this is this idea of we're better off if we're willing to accept that some of the decisions that we have made were just bad decisions that we made, not because we just had bad, dumb luck, but because it was actually a bad decision.
Yeah. I mean, that goes to the heart of a lot of what this is that we are rationalizing beings, and we don't like this feeling of that we did something wrong. We will blame. It's the attribution error, the fundamental attribution error. Somebody else does something. Oh, that's because they're an idiot. When something bad happens to us, it's because, well, the situation was such that is there.
Right.
And that goes, I think, a lot to why we don't learn. And I think the important thing that we are talking with Andrea and Audun about is learning, right? Is how do we then take these insights and learn and change our behavior so that we're safer in the mountains here and various different pieces. And one of the really interesting pieces that I got from this is this idea that making these decisions under uncertainty, but also how you can do that better, but then how do you communicate that? How can you communicate the risk factors that are involved? And we are not good just as humans in understanding risk. As we talked with Anurag Vaish, right? Where risk is not a number.
Definitely not.
You can put a number out there, but that doesn't have real meaning for me. That a 5 versus a 3 versus a 2, what does that mean? You need to have a vivid visual element that has an emotional component, which is why I loved the baseball bat.
Oh yeah, making it vivid. Yeah.
Making it, hey, fine. You want to go up there and do that? How would you want me to? I'll take this baseball bat and I can smack you as hard as I can across your shins. You want that? Well, no.
Right.
No, I don't want that. Well, that's what happens if you're in an avalanche.
And the number 2 doesn't doesn't communicate that. And as Andrea said, number 2 might say it's a low probability, but it doesn't necessarily say it's a low probability for a massively highly consequential potential that things could be really, really, really bad, even though the probability is low. And so that number doesn't do a particularly good job.
Yeah. So I think that's interesting. And I thought one of the interesting findings that they had, right, is that, hey, communicating risk, sometimes there's counterintuitive findings. So it's better to ask people, how safe is it, rather than how dangerous is it?
Yeah.
Because our brains know that it's not safe. And so when you ask how safe it is, your brain actually works in a way to figure out, oh, well, this isn't as safe as it is, versus how dangerous is it? Well, we know it's not safe. So is it as dangerous as it could be? No. So it's not as dangerous as the potential, but is it as safe as it could be? You're getting people to think about things differently. And that was amazing.
That got me thinking about gun safety. What if the question around gun safety was more like, how safe is this gun, rather than how dangerous is it? Because don't we all kind of know that guns are dangerous?
And they are, if you're in the wrong hands or you're doing the wrong things with them. So yeah, asking that. Think about automobiles. How safe is this, right? Driving. I love the conversation about, hey, the speed limit sign means that's the minimum that I should drive, right? As opposed to looking at the conditions. It's like, oh, it's 55. That means I have to drive 55 regardless of if it's black ice and snowy and dark and everything. No, that's not how it is. So changing the framing of how we ask the question is vital to good communication around risk. And again, thinking about this from a corporate environment, what can corporate leaders do? What can you do if you are just a person on a team and you're thinking about, all right, we're acquiring a new company, or we're starting a new product line, or we're changing our service agreement, or we're looking at, a tweak to this product design. All of those have some semblance of risk, and yet we often probably overlook that risk. And I'm not saying that we need to live our life in fear and kind of doing all of these things, but let's ask the question and then saying, all right, instead of how dangerous is this, how safe is this? Change the way that we frame those questions around that, I think, is really important.
Getting back to this counterintuitive thing, Kurt, it makes me think about sales incentives are often orchestrated and designed in such a way that they make it easy for the sales reps to participate. And maybe a counterintuitive way of thinking about that might be saying, how can I make more friction to actually getting into the game? And this is something that some of my own research has discovered, that when we ask a sales rep to go and make a commitment, that their commitment and that their reward is going to be based on the reliability of their commitment and the number that they commit to, that actually gets someone to stop and think about, how much do I want to participate in this particular sales incentive, and what are the potential outcomes if I don't live up to this commitment? And so rather than making it easier, maybe actually getting someone to think about it and making it a little harder, adding some friction, could be a better way of engaging. And of course, our data actually shows that more people do engage in performing at a higher level when they're challenged in that way.
Well, which brings up an interesting perspective, because you're going, well, there's no risk in an incentive, right? If I'm a participant and I'm automatically enrolled in an incentive, there's no risk to me. But
right.
There is a risk. There's a risk that you're not maximizing that opportunity. And so we assume that there's no risk, but there really is. If I am not focused in on this and doing the things that I need to do, then I risk losing money. When you make it harder, when you make it salient that there is an actual risk involved, all of a sudden you're changing the game for people and they're more aware of it. And thus they're going to be more motivated in order to make sure that that failure doesn't happen, when that failure may not have been something that was salient and vivid in their mind before, because it just never occurred to them. And again, similar to going out and skiing and looking at that beautiful hill. And are you taking all of those conditions that, hey, these are the factors that are going into this, and is this really safe, or am I just going through the motions and not really considering all of that?
Yeah. How about bouncing back to powder fever as a corollary to sexual arousal? I know it's a bit of a 90-degree turn, but I love the fact that, in fact, this whole conversation started with Andrea when she and I were talking on a Zoom call, and George Lowenstein came up and she's like, "Oh, you know George?" I'm like, "Yeah, I know George." And she said, "Well, I've been working with him on this project based on the work that he and Dan Ariely did on with the college students at Berkeley." And I just think that it's so fantastic that that people in the field of economics are using a tool like this to help us understand how we make decisions.
Well, I think it's a wonderful analogy of how we make decisions in hot states versus cold states, which again is George and Dan's work around sex and how risky will you be in sex when you're in a cold state, when you're just asked, would you use protection? Hell yes, I'll use protection. When you're in a roused state, are you more likely to say, no, I just need to do this, right? And the same thing with snow fever. Powder fever is on the ground, like we said in the intro, driving up to that mountain. If you would have asked, Andrea, would you make that decision to get 5 turns in? She would have said no. That's the cold state.
Yeah.
But being up there on the mountain and going, I did all of this work, and at least when we get something out of this, well, that's an aroused state. And how many times this gets into sunk cost fallacy, right? We've invested so much, so I have to keep going. Right. It's
Right.
Almost that arousal of like, I've done this. It's this idea that I'm in this argument with this person and I'm now aroused. I need to continue it because I need to win. No, you don't. No, you've made an investment, but further investment isn't going to is unlikely to provide the results that you want. Stop investing. Quit. But that's hard. It's that, as you always like to bring up, Jerry Seinfeld's nighttime guy versus morning guy.
It also reminds me of in college, I played in a cover band and did a lot of 9 to 1 a.m. shows on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights. And inevitably on the Friday and Saturday nights, there would be a group of people hanging around after the bar is closed, the band is packing up, and we got to witness the scanning of the potential partners experience of who's left and who could I go home with right now, which is a total nighttime guy thing, because none of those people would have chosen their partners or accepted being asked in the broad daylight, but after being hammered, drunk, and at the end of the night with this drive of I'm going to go home with somebody, they made bad decisions. I can assure you they did.
Which was the only way that I ever, was able. No, I'm not saying that. But there's an aspect of scarcity there, right, too, that comes in, which is part of what we're talking about with this risk. There's only so many powder days that you get. There's only many, first track times that you will have. And the same thing can be said for business in some of this. There is a scarcity. There's only so many business opportunities that we may get a chance to be part of. There's only so many times that we get to make these types of changes to a product or a service or different pieces. And are we only doing it because, hey, I know that if I miss this chance, I might not get another chance to make this type of impact, even if you're ending up going home with Kurt instead of, George Clooney, right?
But this is an illusion of scarcity to some degree. To some degree, it's real, but to some degree, it is an illusion of scarcity. And this is where we would get to Max Bazerman saying, let's stop the myth of the fixed pie and start thinking about a bigger pie. And I'm not going for any kind of sexual innuendo there. I'm just going to leave that. Okay. All right.
Well, I think that the conversation here is one of those that if you just take it on face value, it's intriguing, right? Our conversation, and it's fascinating, and particularly if you are a backcountry skier, various different pieces. But the real insights that come from this is saying, how do the insights that we get from this world of taking risks in a avalanche environment translate into how we take and perceive risks in our everyday environment? Getting back to, our conversation with Rod Wagner, who says, hey, for most of us, the most dangerous time in most of our lives is not, it's when we get behind the wheel of a car or when we're riding in a car. We have 5,000 pounds going at 60, 70 miles per hour. Those are dangerous times. And yet we don't perceive that as risky. We typically don't look at that situation and assess that risk the same way we would if we were jumping out of an airplane or if we were doing some other more vivid, risky thing. And yet those are the times that most people get hurt. It's those kinds of situations. And so being able to translate some of the insights that, they were making in this conversation to our regular everyday lives.
That's fantastic, Kurt. Let's close with a quote from Audun, and then hang around because, Kurt, you're gonna do a bonus track with us. So
woohoo!
But if you don't kind of realize the risk you're in, you're unable to do anything with it.
Hey Groovers, this is Kurt with our bonus track and groove idea for the week. Andrea and Audun teed up some very important aspects of decision making under uncertainty, and we wanted to review a couple of them with you. First, it's common for us to make decisions where the outcomes are uncertain. The bigger the risk, the more we need to pay attention to our decision-making process, like the biases that sit just below our consciousness. Second, we need to get feedback in order to decide how good our decision-making process was. Without feedback, we're likely to make the same mistake again. Lastly, we are better off if we assess the risk in any given situation before we actually get into it. As Andrea said, deciding to have sex with a condom isn't going to be made in the passion of the moment. It's going to be decided in the cool state and practiced so that it can happen easily when cooler minds are not prevailing. All right. For your groove idea for the week, we'd like you to think about how you make decisions with big consequences at work. Do you try to step out of the heat of the moment and overcome your biases? We'd like you to imagine what big decisions might be coming up in your job in the coming weeks or months. What might the decision look like, and what can you do right now to think about the ways of dealing with that situation? What are the biases that could raise their ugly heads with some of the people at the table? What constraints are likely to make it difficult to see beyond the simplest, but not always the best solutions? We encourage you to map out a pre-mortem, the way that Audun's friend thought about what the avalanche report might include as likely causes if he skied and was caught in an avalanche. Imagine what people would say after the meeting for this big decision if it fails. Give it some consideration and write down what you think might happen. Then figure out the things you'll need to do to avoid an avalanche in your office. Well, that wraps up another episode of Behavior Grooves. We thank you for listening, and we hope that this week you go out and find your groove.